afternoon, or a good evening from wherever you are. Warmly welcome to the first of 3 webinars for DimensionCM 14.3.2, a release we made available at the end of last month. Got lots of new and exciting things, and I'm extremely pleased that we're getting cracking with the 3 webcasts. Today I would warmly welcome Avi Brody and Peter Raymond as our primary speakers. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
WhiteSource are a terrific partner of ours. They attended our DevOps Interchange conference. We have integrated their technology, and you're going to hear and see about their technology and also see from Peter Raymond how it's integrated into our DimensionCM technology. We're very excited about the partnership. We're very excited about the value it will bring for customers. And without further ado, I'll hand over the presentation rights. So Avi can get going.
So this is obviously what our presentation is about: continuously secure and manage your open source components. And I'm going to take you through the first 2 bullets here, the responsibilities that come with open source, what WhiteSource's approach is to helping you manage open source. And then Peter will move over to the Serena DimensionCM integration part and actually show you all a demo, and then we'll open up the session to questions and answers. So if we're talking about the responsibilities that come with open source usage, if you people remember, about 5 years ago, Mark Anderson from Netscape and HP fame wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal about how software is eating the world. And what we've actually found is that it's not a matter of software anymore eating the world, it's a matter of open source software. And if you can look at the analysts' comments, we can see how much open source is actually being used. And I remember years ago that if you would have asked let's say a bank, are you using open source? So the bank would have said, sure, our Oracle data warehouse is running on Linux. So basically, the open source usage back then was very, very infrastructure oriented. But as time has gone on, we see more and more developers are actually including open source components into their actual applications. And that's what we're seeing is the growth factor in the recent years. More and more applications are built on open source, and we're seeing numbers like even, I'm going to be very conservative here and saying 50 to 60% of an application may consist of open source components. But when you are using that open source, which gives you a lot of power in order to be able to get your products out to the market sooner, finish your applications quicker, there's more responsibility as opposed to when you're using commercial software or in-house developed code. And the first challenge that the organizations are facing is, first of all, discovering what open source they are actually using. Because it might sound very obvious, but developers are not very good at keeping a good track of what open source they're using. Even the ones that are good at it, they'll probably be saying, if you're managing this with spreadsheets, they'll be listing all the components that they've used. Odds are they're not including all the dependencies and the dependency tree, which can add tens of other open source components in there that they're not aware of. And once you do know what open source you're using, obviously the next question you're going to ask is, are my developers introducing any security vulnerabilities into my system by inserting open source components? Now, there's a whole argument whether open source is safer or not safer. I'm not going to get into that. I think software is developed by people. People are going to make mistakes, and it doesn't matter whether it's commercial or open. You are going to come up with security issues. The next issue that people are facing are, what are the licenses of these open source components? Because open source software, like any commercial software, is associated with a license, and these licenses are legally binding. So depending on how you're using and how you're distributing your software, the license can have a serious impact on your organization. And we see as organizations become more and more sophisticated in their use of open source, they want to know what the quality of the open source is. If their developers are going out and pulling things in, how do they know that the code they're bringing in is good code? So going back to vulnerabilities, the good news is that really when the when vulnerabilities are discovered, the open source community is very good at fixing them. They generally take things to heart. They're very attached to the open source projects that they're contributing to, and they do their best to fix things as soon as they are discovered. Obviously, the more popular open source projects get the best attention. The bad news is that if you don't have a good inventory and you don't have somebody actually monitoring your system, monitoring what open source you're using and what vulnerabilities are being published, it's very hard to make that association. If there's a new vulnerability, does it actually affect the specific component that your developer is using? So what we're finding is that organizations generally are not paying enough attention to the open source. And if you look at this graph here, again, we're showing that in many cases, most of the application can actually be built from open source, and a minor part of the application is actually your business logic. On the other hand, we find that organizations are spending a lot of money investing in tools like IDEs and scanners and whatever other development tools they have for actually developing and managing their proprietary code, but they're ignoring the open source code, which again may be the majority of their actual application. So how does WhiteSource come and help you here? Well, basically we take two approaches to this whole issue. First of all, we help you know where you actually stand, and we do that by supplying a wide variety of plugins to a wide range of continuous integration and build tools. And what these plugins do is that they analyze all the components that get into the build, get into your project, your product or application when you run your build. We detect the open source. We send information about that over to our application, and then at any point in time afterwards you can now just click on a button and generate reports to find out all various information about those components. Those reports can be obviously your basic inventory report, reports based on licensing, reports based on security vulnerabilities, and all this information will be cataloged by your product or by your line of business application. On a continuing basis, though, we do have a system that more or less monitors your inventory and your builds. So first of all, the first thing you would do would be setting up a policy where you would actually tell WhiteSource what open source you're willing to accept in your organization and what open source you're not willing to accept, and that can be based on various criteria, which is very simple to set up in our system. And then when you run your build, each component will be checked against the policy, and if it fails that policy check, there are two options. Either you can actually tell your build to fail or actually allow the build to complete, and then you'll see alerts within the WhiteSource application. But aside from that, we do track your inventory. So as new versions of code that you're using is being released, as new fixes are being released, as new security vulnerabilities are discovered in components that's in your inventory, we'll send alerts and we'll let you know about that. So you have an ongoing, a live system here that's monitoring your environment, making sure you always have the up-to-date information about your inventory. What we've also done is basically what we call a shift left over here, in that we have a selection tool which moves the whole process earlier in the development cycle. If I said on this side that we detect your open source during the build, what the selection tool is an extension to your Chrome browser, which at the time your developer goes to some open source repository on the internet, such as Maven Central, and starts researching a component, our extension will open up a window and give the developer information about that open source component, which it will take out of your WhiteSource installation. And the type of information that it will give him will be the license it's associated with, the security vulnerabilities that we know about, whether or not it passes your policy check, and whether or not it's already in use in your organization. So when your developer looks at this component, he can see whether or not it fits your company needs. If it doesn't fit your company's needs, instead of downloading it and starting a whole development process, he can decide, well, let me go look for another component which does a similar function but is compatible with my company's requirements. That can be a very big time saver in your development process. So as you can see, we actually hold your hand. We accompany you through the whole software development lifecycle, starting at the selection time, detection during your building and testing. We also have a very easy to use release documentation capability where at the click of a button you can get a very nice HTML report showing all the artifacts in your product, all the versions, the licenses, and we even put the actual license into this HTML report, so it's very easy to publish. And on an ongoing maintenance state, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be monitoring your builds via your policies. You can always take reports and know your constant, your current state of open source, and the alerts, which will constantly be giving you new information about the components in your product. Just a couple of points about what sets WhiteSource apart. First of all, we are the first open source security tool on the market. We have a proprietary database of known vulnerabilities which is based on multiple data sources. So we not only take information from the CVE or NVD database, but we have a list of other sources of vulnerability information. And our vulnerability information will not produce false positives, which means that if you're using, for example, 5 components out of an open source project that consists of 20 components, we won't be telling you that this open source project has 15 vulnerabilities. We're going to be telling you that these vulnerabilities exist for these 5 open source components which you are using, which can be a very big time saver. You won't have to go chasing after things. Additionally, an enhancement that we came out with about a week ago, we not only will be telling you about the security vulnerabilities, but we'll actually be giving you recommendations on how to fix the vulnerabilities. And we are the only product out there today that does that. We're tracking over 3 million open source projects, so we have very good coverage. As I showed in that prior foil, we cover you through the whole software development lifecycle, and we do integrate with all common build tools and CI servers. So if you're developing in one environment today and you acquire other companies or you move to new technologies, you can be sure that WhiteSource will constantly give you the full support you need. Lastly would be the cross-team support. We give information for everybody that has an interest in open source, and that would be your engineering team that might want to keep a track of their inventory, know about new versions, your security team that would be looking at security vulnerabilities, your legal team that want information about the licenses that are being used, and they all have this information. They all have access to this information via their browser. It's very simple. I always tell potential customers how easy it is to use by the fact that we don't even offer education because it is so straightforward of a solution. The coverage we have, as you can see here, close to 15 or so languages. We also cover Docker containers, Debian, CentOS RPMs, Android APKs, Go, Swift, Objective-C. You can see the list of CI servers we've got here, the build tools we've got, and our increasing partnership with more and more companies. The latest one of which we're very proud of is the Micro Focus Serena partnership. So I'll pass it over to Peter now, and Peter will continue into how our products integrate and show you how this works. Peter.
Great, thanks for that good overview there of WhiteSource. Let me just share my screen and we'll talk a little bit about the integration between Serena and WhiteSource. Okay, so the integration we built, released with the CM 14.3.2 release that Ashley was talking about right at the beginning, is basically a Pulse Expert plugin. So this is a plugin to Serena DimensionCM Pulse that allows us to call out to WhiteSource as developers are doing their work so that we can get all of that value that Avi was just talking about. We can detect when a developer does a delivery, did that delivery include some new open source tools? If so, which ones? If so, how are they licensed? If so, what security issues do those tools that your developer just pulled into your application actually contain? So it's a way of continuously judging what open source components you have and what issues those components have as you're putting your code into version control with Serena Dimensions. So it brings visibility to the information that comes from WhiteSource into the Serena Pulse UI, alongside information from other tools. So perhaps you've executed some static analysis, perhaps you've done some checking of the code style. Information from those tools, or even information from build tools, can be shown alongside the information from WhiteSource and alongside the peer review that happens in Serena Pulse. So when you're sitting in Serena Pulse, and you'll see this in a minute, you'll be able to see against the files that are changed what open source did they pull in and what issues does that open source have. So really it's continuously, accurately analyzing your open source risk by a partnership between Serena and WhiteSource. So the benefits of using this integration, it's partly what Avi was talking about around discovering issues early. So, you know, if you have a security problem, it's going to be faster to fix it if it's found earlier on in the development lifecycle, rather than when the software has been deployed out to production, for example. So knowing what open source you've got in your product and evaluating whether it meets your policies every time a developer does a delivery, that's going to help you catch policy violations and security issues much earlier on in your life cycle. And of course it's continuous, so you know it's happening all the time in the background as developers are making changes. We're calling out to WhiteSource to assess what's been delivered. And it can result in metrics and KPIs. You'll see some of these in the demo that can really tell, you know, for your business partners, what open source are they pulling in, for your management team, summarizing what your risks are around the licenses for the components that you brought in. So there is a reporting and metrics aspect to this integration as well. So with that, I'm going to switch over to a demonstration and we'll see some of this in action. So I'm going to log into Serena Dimensions Pulse. And first of all, we're going to basically play a day in the life of a developer. A developer is going to find some work to work upon and start making some changes. So perhaps first of all, the developer might look at the work that's in their current sprint. So let's actually look at a backlog of work within the Serena Dimensions. And we've got a backlog here already created. And you'll see we've got a bunch of epics in this backlog. For example, we have some work being done to implement a loyalty discount for our customers. And we also have some work being done around adding insurance for people who are playing Pokemon Go, perhaps on their phones, have accidents, and they need to get an insurance quote from us. So this piece of software this developer is going to be working on is an insurance application. So you can see here, for example, that there's a particular request that's going to be worked upon as part of this, this day in the life of a developer. And it's to extend the application to add support with paying using their mobile device. So we can open that request up. This is a DimensionCM change request, and we can see what it's asking the developer to do. This is a change request to go and modify our insurance application. We can see all the properties of that request. We can see its history, who's done what to that request so far. But let's actually start working on that request. So perhaps it's the most important thing to work upon. So we're going to drag it up to the top of our backlog. So simple drag and drop prioritization of developer work. That's part of what you get in DimensionCM 14.3.2. Let's go into an iteration where developers are executing on that work. And what you'll see here is a card wall style of view showing the requests that are in the iteration. So this is a time period from 4th of November to 17th of November where developers are sprinting on some amount of requests that they're going to be working on. And in this iteration, you can see we've got request number 36 we were just looking at. We can open that up again here, see the details of that request. We can also see all the other work that's going on. And notice that each of these requests has a little symbol up in the top right of the request. And that's reflecting information from the experts that Dimensions is integrated with back onto this card wall view. So if WhiteSource tells me that my change that I deliver against my request has security issues or violates my policies, that indicator will go red. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but let's move this request over. So each of these columns here is a state for the requests. So currently the request is just sitting at raised. I'm going to drag and drop it over to be under work. So this is indicating that a developer now has a piece of work that he's got to carry out. We can see who that's going to be assigned to. So it's going to go to one of our developers called Dinesh. You could obviously change your mind about who that goes to. Maybe we'll say this is a really urgent change. And now we're actioning that request in DimensionCM to the under work state so that the developer can start working on it. Now I wanted to talk a bit more about this, this indication up in the top right of the health or quality of the change. Let's have a look at the tools that are going to run whenever a change is delivered to this demo system. So if I go over to our products and come into one of our streams, this is the stream where the developer is going to do his work. We've got a section in here called expert chains. That's the set of tools that are going to run whenever a delivery occurs or on a schedule or maybe manually triggered. And you can see I've got two chains here. I've got a build and analysis chain, and that is defined that it's going to run on every delivery. So every time a developer delivers to this stream, anything in the source folder or below, we're going to execute the set of tools that are defined in this chain. And in this case, the set of tools we're going to run is we're going to do a Jenkins CI build. So when a developer makes his change, we're going to do a build of that change. We're then going to invoke check style to check the style of that change. We might invoke other tools like static analysis tools, but in this case we're also invoking WhiteSource. So simply by putting some information in here that I got from my WhiteSource web page, what they call the API keys, the product keys, I've configured this system to talk to WhiteSource so that when the delivery occurs, it's going to look at all the WAR files, jar files, all the Java code, and look for the license usage within that code and look for security issues within that code. So that's the chain of tools that's going to run every time I do a delivery. Now, of course, we could have that run not just on every delivery, but maybe at a certain time of day, you know, at a certain hour of the day, or maybe on certain days of the week, just a Wednesday and a Thursday. You'd be able to configure how often these tools run. In this case, we're going to leave it running on every single change. And of course, you can have multiple sets of these tools. So I've got another chain here. Maybe some of the analysis you want to run once a week. So you'd have a different chain of tools for doing a more detailed analysis versus a simple chain of tools for doing an analysis on every delivery. So that's the chains that we have. Let's have a look at the graph of streams in this particular product. So this is our savings stream that we were just looking at the chains on it. And you can see in this graph that we branched off to do a hotfix, we merged that back again. And along the way, with every delivery, these dots have been colored to indicate the health or quality of the change according to those tools that we called out to. So if my Jenkins build fails, or if my check style fails, or if my WhiteSource analysis violates a policy, that change is going to go red like this one here. If those tools all say that the change is good, it's going to go green. If it's kind of not sure, the quality is kind of in the middle, the dot's going to go yellow. And if it's orange, it's in progress. The ticks and the crosses inside these circles is to do with peer review. So the circle indicates the quality as judged by the tools that we've called. The ticks and the crosses is a human making a judgment about the quality of what's being delivered. It's, did this pass its peer review or not? So with that, we've seen the set of tools that are going to run, and let's actually go and make a change as a developer. Let's implement our insurance change. So we could obviously do that in any IDE or tool that DimensionCM supports. I'll be doing that today in Eclipse. So this is just a developer doing his daily work. Now, of course, he needs to find the request that's asking him to perform work. So back in his IDE, he can see that Clarius CR36 that was given to him by the Pulse user interface. So saying that he needs to add support for Apple Pay. So that's the task he's going to work on today. So he's going to add that to his working list, and then he's just going to start making code changes. So maybe he adds a new variable to detect if it's a Pokemon Go player who's asking for an insurance quote. And maybe he's going to change the amount that we charge based on that. So fairly simple code change. Let's charge a little bit extra if they're playing Pokemon Go and they have an accident. Now obviously that's a code change, but part of a change could be a lot more than just changing some lines of code. Maybe there's a website. We want to add the Apple Pay logo to that as part of that change. So let's make that change as well. So I'm going to drag my image into the IDE. And perhaps in order to pay by Apple Pay, we have to use some Java libraries. So I'm going to pull in the Apple Java API into my project. And perhaps we also need to use some other open source components. So drag those also into my IDE. Now I'm ready to deliver my changes back into Dimensions. So we go team deliver. It'll just confirm that we've made a number of changes. So we've added a few files, we've changed a few files. We're going to deliver that. Give it a comment. Pick our request that we're making this change for. Now the source code and the jar files that we've changed are all going under DimensionCM version control. And as part of that operation, when they're delivered into Dimensions, we're going to kick off that chain of tools that you saw in Dimensions Pulse. So if I go back to my graph here, you'll see that's updated automatically, and there's now a new dot on the graph, delivered on Tuesday the 15th, and it's gone orange, which means the set of tools that we had configured, the Jenkins build, the check style, the WhiteSource analysis, that's now all running on those files that I delivered. And we can drill into that and see a bit more detail about what's currently happening. So if I open up the details of the change, obviously we can see things like who made the change, when did they make it, but we can see that currently a Jenkins build is in progress. So that chain of tools has kicked off and has started to happen. You can see progress of that in a number of different places. For example, if we go back to our particular stream where we did our delivery and you look at our expert chain, you actually get a detailed log of what's happening. So we can see the cog is spinning against that chain, so it is currently being executed. And we can get some logs here. So it's actually finished a Jenkins build, it's now off doing check style. It's now finished check style, it's off doing the WhiteSource analysis. So if I go back to our graph, the change has gone red. So let's have a look and see why that change went red. So it went red because one of the experts in the chain indicated that the change is bad. And you can see it was the WhiteSource expert that said this change is bad. So WhiteSource did its analysis of the code that was delivered, and it found some policy violations. Therefore, it's now announced that that change is not a healthy change. So let's have a look at what policy violations it found. So we can see that WhiteSource reported back to us that we had a number of high security vulnerabilities. So some known vulnerabilities in the open source component that we pulled in, Commons collections. We can also see that WhiteSource said there's a new version of Commons collections, and that really good practice would be for me to adopt that new version. It's saying that overall there's too many vulnerabilities in Commons collections, and that's not a good library to pull in. It's also actually flagging that Apple Java API that I pulled in. There's a new version of that as well. And it's reporting some metrics, like the number of security vulnerabilities found when it did its analysis. If I scroll down a bit in this page, we can see the files that were changed. And I mentioned earlier on that it's bringing together information from all of those tools that were in that chain. You know, that's what's valuable about this. It's automating calling those tools, and it's bringing visibility to the information found by those tools. So we can see the lines of code that I changed, and they're decorated with what we call findings from those experts. So for instance, CheckStyle has said that particular line of code, I really should have put some curly braces around that if statement. So that's a typical style checker complaining about the style of code. So the information that we had from WhiteSource up here, and the information we had from CheckStyle and the code differences, all in one place. Now at this point, the other thing I can do here is you'll notice each of these experts, some of them have a link out to the actual tool itself that performs the analysis. So in this case, if I click here, it's going to take me over to the WhiteSource website to see a little bit more detail about what happened in WhiteSource. So we can see here the dashboard in WhiteSource determining what I added to the library. It'll tell me how they're used.
Peter, I don't know whether you can hear me. This is Ash here. You're breaking up pretty badly.
Okay, I will try and stay close to the mic. Okay. So over in WhiteSource, we can see a lot more detail. Find out what the recommended action is.
You mean the browser, Pete? I'm sorry, Pete. We can't hear a word you're saying. If you would like, you can just show the screens and I can explain it.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, because we really can't hear you. What Pete is showing us here is the security vulnerability screen, which gives information about the vulnerabilities. As you can see, the severity, the score, the data got published, what library has the vulnerability, and what projects contain that library over on the right under occurrences. On the bottom of the page, we see fixes, and here WhiteSource is the only product out there that actually gives recommendations on how to fix the security vulnerability. You'll typically see one or more fixes here, which we've ranked by priority order. If you feel that one of the other fixes is more appropriate, you can click on the star on the left and vote that this fix is more appropriate. And if you click on that bug 1279330, will actually take you over to the source of the information, as you can see here, Bugzilla, where we got that fix recommendation from. Okay, you can close that, Peter, and just continue. I'll keep on talking according to what you show them. Okay, this is how we set up policies. As you see there, you can set up multiple policies based on various criteria. Pete, would you like to click on that Add Policy, and we'll quickly go through that. On the right-hand side, the blue Add Policy button. And you can set up policies on a product level or on an organization level. As you can see here, click on that, please. You can see you can set up policies based on licenses, based on a regex that points to a resource, on your group artifact or version attributes, or as you can see here, the security vulnerability severity level, the age of the component, and it's very simple. You would just pick one of those, go to the right, and choose the action that you want to do. For example, here, if it's a high bug rating, we can automatically reject the component. And you can do that for vulnerabilities as well. You can reassign them. Here we see the first, we'll just quickly go through the list. We have a license-based policy. We have a bug rating policy-based security level policy. And as you can see, you can automatically approve, reject, reassign, or actually even set up conditions for approving or not approving the open source component. Hey, this is our home screen, which gives basically a summary of what's going on within WhiteSource. In the middle, you see the various products that we've analyzed, and we've got 7 products here. For each product, you'll see its inventory in the middle of this screen, and on the right, you'll see that product's license distribution. I don't think it pays to do this, but if you click on any of those things that Pete just highlighted, we'll open up specific reports for those functions. On the top of the page, we see environmental type of information showing you the security vulnerability score for your organization. We see we've got some high severity vulnerabilities highlighted in red on the right. We've got some medium severity vulnerabilities. We've got 100 outdated components. We've got 19 vulnerabilities all in all, and we've got components that have severe bugs, 18 critical bugs and 9 blocker bugs. And on the left, all these things are, you're informed about all these things by various types of alerts that we've got in the system. And as you can see, there are alerts by security vulnerabilities. There are alerts for policy violations. We've got alerts for outdated components telling you that there are new versions, and we even tell you if you're using multiple versions of the same component across your development environment.
Okay. Thanks for taking us through that, Avi. Can you hear me any better now, or still?
Welcome back, Peter.
Okay. Not sure what happened there with the headset. But okay, let's have a look at some of the reporting back in Dimensions. So that was a good overview of what we can see in WhiteSource. But you'll also notice for this particular change that was delivered, there's a button here that downloads a HTML report just for that particular change. So the number of libraries scanned, the license types discovered, some of that information that you are seeing in the WhiteSource UI can also be seen in this report file here. And also seeing information from WhiteSource alongside information from other tools. So let's go to our saving stream and look at the reports for that stream within Pulse. So within Pulse, of course, we have reports around the activity that happens in Dimensions, like deliveries that have occurred, peer review approvals and rejections over time, who's doing approvals and rejections, some totals up here. This is all customizable information about the peer review and about deliveries, but you can also have information from other tools. So for example here, we've got information that came from WhiteSource. So we've done 3 deliveries in the system over time, and you can see at one point in time we had 5 security vulnerabilities. That went down to 1, and now it's gone up again with our latest delivery. So you can see the trend of how your application's quality is going. And then similarly, maybe metrics from other tools like static analysis tools. Again, it's just that notion of trying to bring information about the health and quality of your code from all these different tools into one place where you can use it to help you with your peer review. So that is the end of what I had planned for a demo today. Quite happy to take questions from people.
So Peter Saccia, I did notice there was one question. Unfortunately, I seem to have lost my questions panel, but I remember the question. So John wanted to know how would this work with SBM? So imagine you've got SBM and CM. Maybe run through a scenario where this would all work, where you've got high-level request management in SBM.
Yeah, sure. So, in fact, it's interesting, we use these tools ourselves in-house, of course. And here, to build Dimensions, we do use SBM as our high-level issue tracking system. So when a customer phones our support team, that will eventually become a ticket in SBM. Now, your business team can do some level of approvals and transitioning through states up in SBM, but at some point, you'll want that SBM ticket to come down into something like one of these backlogs. So you want the development team to have a ticket to perform work against. And that's typically a change request in Dimensions. So if you see underneath these epics and features, we have Dimensions change requests. These change requests could have been synchronized from an SBM ticket. So you could have been using Serena Business Manager for that high-level process, but there might be some transition in your SBM workflow that would trigger creation of a DimensionCM request. That could either be using our synchronized tool that we offer between Dimensions and CM, or using orchestrations to connect SBM and CM. So we do have various integration approaches, but at the end of the day, the things that you're working on here in these backlogs and iterations are Dimensions requests. Doesn't matter if they came from SBM or not. It's requests that developers are working on. Does that help answer your question, John? Okay, I guess so. Any other questions, Ash, that you can see?
So I have a couple of other questions for you. Again, I'm going from memory because I seem to have lost my thing. In terms of setup and configuring, say someone downloads DimensionCM 14.3.2 today. What does it take to get the WhiteSource plugin working?
Great question. So it's actually very simple. So WhiteSource can be hosted as a SaaS solution. So it's hosted up in the cloud. So this website we went to, saas.whitesourcesoftware.com, is out in the internet land. So you don't have to install WhiteSource locally. You can use their cloud-based solution. You don't need to install any additional Dimension software. You simply need to create that entry in that expert chain. So when I went to my stream, we had expert chains here, and we had our build and analysis chain, and we added WhiteSource to the chain, and I'll show what that would look like if we you'd simply say add, and you'd pick WhiteSource to say that's what you're adding, and then you'd give it a name, you'd paste in your tokens from their web page, you'd say what types of files you want to analyze, maybe there's certain files you want to exclude, so you could specify that here, and how often do you want to poll WhiteSource for results. So there's no additional software to install locally, there's just configuration of this expert. And I believe those API keys, product keys, tokens, I think I can show you where those are in WhiteSource. So there's the API key. So you'd simply go to that page, you'd grab the API key and cut and paste it. In fact, they've even got a little link here to help you cut and paste that back into Dimensions. And you've got the tokens for your products and projects. And you'd cut and paste those back into these three fields here. So it should be fairly straightforward to set up. No WhiteSource software has to be installed. Just install CM 14.3.2, set up the expert, and go.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Avi, any thoughts, questions from you in terms, I'll give you the floor for a couple of minutes in terms of what you want to say about WhiteSource and working with Serena.
Well, you caught me off guard here. Actually, no. WhiteSource is very easy to set up. As Peter said, it is a software as a service application, so you don't need to install any servers or databases on your environment. You did see the integration. It is very simple. You just stick in those tokens or API keys into CM and it runs.
Awesome. I think that wraps up the questions. Peter, do you see any more on your side?
No, I don't think so, Ash. Yep, I think we're good.
Okay, so before we close, let me just say a few words. This is the first in a series of 3 webinars, and I want to thank Avi and WhiteSource in particular for their contribution to this webinar. I believe open source is pervasive, and I think we all owe it to automate the checks and balances when we're delivering software. We do have 2 additional webcasts, one in December around the Git connector, so if you're interested in that, please do sign up. And then the one in January around containers, and specifically the Docker private registry that comes with Dimensions 14.3.2. So if there are no other questions, I'd like to thank everybody. In particular, I thank Avi and Peter, and I'm glad Peter was able to change his headset halfway through. And we look forward to seeing you on many more webcasts. Thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care.